Oh, good, good. Okay. So, Ellie, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies. I hope you will like this list. I'll try to get done in the 25 minutes that Jane suggested. And we're going to begin with Mary Jane. Mary Jane is my first book for a couple of reasons. I by the author's last name, so that her name is Jessica Anya Blau, and it was probably my favorite fun book to read this past year. And I guess I loved it so because it's such a happy little book. The main character in the book is a 14-year-old girl who has seen an ad in the paper for a babysitter for this psychiatrist and his wife have a 5-year-old daughter, Izzy, and they need a babysitter for the summer. And this would be Mary Jane's first job. And she talks her mother into applying for it. Now, the story is set in 1975, Baltimore. And the author in an interview that I watched of her said she set that there at that time period because she thought it was the last year that any 14-year-old would be as naive as Mary Jane is. And she certainly is. She gets the job to babysit, and the psychiatrist and his wife are ex-hippies who have invited a drug addict and his wife to spend the summer with them, and the psychiatrist is going to get him cured of both of those difficulties. And this is the husband of a famous movie star, and he's a rocker. And one of the fun things in the book is to try and figure out who she might have used as her example of the movie star and her husband. It is laugh out loud fun to read. Of course, everything shocks Mary Jane, which I do think is a play on another name for pot because there's a lot of it being smoked in this story. But it is so much fun to read, and it took you back to a time after a year of being locked down with the COVID-19. It just took you away to a different time and a different place and a fun place. I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. It's really a good read. Next on the list is The Good Sister. This is by Sally Hepworth. And it's a story of twin sisters, Rose and Fern. And Rose has always been the stronger sister, the sister that takes care of Fern. Fern is just a little off. She trained as a librarian and has a job in a library. They're in their late 20s now when the story begins. And her sister, who is married, has desperately wanted to have a baby. And Fern thinks, oh, Rose has always been so kind to me. I'll have a baby for her. I could do that. And so Fern starts looking for who might be a good mate to have this baby with. But as the story develops, you begin to wonder, who is really the good sister in this story? And things start switching around. It's a fast read, and you'll want to keep reading it fast. I highly recommend it, and you're going to be surprised. Next is The Maid. Here's a real murder mystery. It's by Nita Prose, and the main character is Molly, who is somewhere on the Asperger diagnosis, and she's been brought up by her grandmother, who, as the story begins, has died 4 months earlier. And her grandmother has tried to teach her how to adapt to the real world out there. And Molly cannot understand idioms everything has to be exactly as said, or she does not understand what you're trying to get across. The grandmother has made her a wonderful house cleaner, taught her everything that she knew about surviving. And so Molly has this job at a little boutique hotel in a big city. And she's the best maid they have because she cleans so thoroughly. That is her job, and she carries it through. So one morning when she comes to do her cleaning, she goes up to the room that she was assigned, goes in, and she finds a dead man in the bed. But what would Molly do if she's been trained to be a good maid? First, she cleans up the room spick and span because it was in disarray. And after it's all clean and straightened up, she calls down to the desk and says, "There seems to be a dead man in this room." And so they immediately come dashing up. And of course he is, but they have nothing for the police to go by because Molly has thrown away, rearranged, and cleaned everything so thoroughly. So it's interesting to see at the hotel, there are maids that are jealous of Molly because she's the one always praised because her rooms are always the cleanest. There's people that know they can take advantage of Molly because of who she is and what she is. And then those who love Molly and help her as much as they can. And when Molly is arrested by the police for the murder of this man, it's interesting to watch who is the friend and who thinks this is what Molly deserves. You've never read a mystery quite like this. I guarantee you're going to like it. This is the best historical novel I have read in years. Maggie O'Farrell has written many historical novels, and this by far is her finest. The New York Times Book Review said it has awarded it as one of the best 10 novels written in 2020. It was a hit all last year in hardcover. It's now gone paper. If you love historical novels, this is the novel to read. It's a story that takes place in the 16th century and is the story of William Shakespeare and his wife, Anne Hathaway, and their family. They had 3 children. Susanna was their oldest, and then they had twins, boy-girl twins, Judith and Hamlet. And it's spelled in the Old English spelling, Hamnet, but it is Hamlet. And the twins contact the plague, the Black Plague in the 16th century. There was nothing those people could do except close down villages and stay away from anyone who had the plague. And this is how the story begins. The twins, Judith especially, is ill, and they are assuming it is the Black Plague, and they're trying to keep everyone away from her. But her young brother, they're 11 years old, loves his sister more than anything else. And in time, he gets the Black Plague. He dies of it. Judith survives it. And in going back and then telling this story, it's really a story of Anne Hathaway, how she meets Shakespeare, of their life together, how she sends him to London where she knows he will be happier writing his plays. Shakespeare's name is never mentioned in this book. First, he is Anne Hathaway's brother's tutor. Next, he is her husband. And lastly, he's the children's father. It's an interesting take, but it's just so beautifully done. You could read a page and then you want to reread it. It's so if you're a fan of historical novels, be sure and check this book out. It's wonderful. Now this book, Fight Night. It's written by the author. I don't know if any of you read it a couple years ago. She's a Canadian writer. It's contemporary. Her book 2 years ago that came out that was so successful was Women Talking. And that was a story about some Mennonite women who had been taken to South America with their husbands to establish a new group of Mennonites in one of the South American countries. And it is without doubt one of the saddest woman's stories I've read. These men were abusing these women just terribly. And when they went out of town for a meeting, the women get together and trying to figure out how they can get away in this foreign country whose language they don't even know. You just had to force yourself to read it, but it was so well done. Well, now she's come out with Fight Night, which you would never think the same author had written it. It can make you laugh out loud on one page, and 2 pages further on, you're in tears. It's a 3-generational story. The grandmother, the daughter, and the granddaughter. And the granddaughter is telling the story. And I have to give a little warning here. It is the worst language of a book I've ever read. The grandmother language is unbelievably bad. And because she is tutoring her grandmother or her granddaughter at home, homeschooling her, because the 9-year-old granddaughter has been thrown out of public school for fighting and bad language. And you know where it's come from. But it is really a story of family and love. And that grandmother and granddaughter adore each other. The grandmother has assigned the granddaughter to write a journal and keep a journal every day of her life to send to the father that has abandoned the family. And so he will know what's going on in the family. And this too, the mother of 9-year-old, I'm going to have to check, Swift, is in her 3rd trimester of a pregnancy. And her income comes from being an actress in a local, so just a local theater group, that the father, although he's abandoned them, is still furnishing money for them. But it is so much fun to read. If you can get over the language, and I know you can because I did, and I thought, oh, I don't think I'm going to read this book. But I kept going and I loved it. And I hope you will too. It's a great family story. And last of the fiction that I'm talking about is The Lincoln Highway. And this is written by Amor Towles, who did The Gentleman from Moscow, that probably most of you have read. That book was so popular that they held it for 4 years in hardcover. And Netflix supposedly is making a series out of it. But this is so entirely different, just like the Fight Night and author and her other book that is so different you would never think the same author wrote them. With this book, it's so different than The Gentleman from Moscow. It takes place in 1954 US, and it's about 2 brothers. One is 18 and one is 8. They're 10 years apart in their age. Their mother has abandoned the family soon after the birth of Billy, the 8-year-old. And the older brother has been in a juvenile detention center for the last 18 months because he, while fighting with another teenage boy, accidentally hit him and he fell down and got a skull fracture and died. So he's sent to juvenile detention, but released since he's the only one that would be available to take care of his 8-year-old brother after his father dies. And the 2 of them decide that they're going to go to California to try and find their mother, because occasionally she would send a postcard to this little boy, never telling where she is, but they always came from California. So they think they're going to go to the LA area and find her. But unknown to Emmett, the main character in the story, two cohorts from the juvenile detention center have escaped and slipped into the trunk of his car. And so when they're exposed, they talk him into going to New York first. Now, those two characters are not the straight and narrow like Emmett actually was. And Duchess really is a sociopath. And as soon as they start out, they agree to go to New York first because those two wanted to go to New York. So he takes his quote mark friends on this journey. And the Lincoln Highway, I did not know this, but it was the first highway built in the United States that went from New York City all the way to LA, and a cross-continent highway that there had never been before. And so they get on the Lincoln Highway and head to New York first, and then the idea is they will turn around and go to California. But the book only takes place in 10 days' time. And this is their adventure on what happens in those 10 days on their trip to New York and into New York. It's quite a tale. I had trouble at first when I started reading it. I wanted Another Gentleman in Moscow, I think. This is an entire different story, but it's good writing and it's a good story, and I'm sure you'll all enjoy it. Now we're off to nonfiction. And this book, and many of you maybe have already read it, The Day the World Came to Town by Jim DeFendi. It was written 15 years ago after the terrorist attack on 9/11. And I don't know if you remember or not, but at that time, all air travel was shut down for 5 days because we didn't know, the government didn't know what was ahead for the US. And these were all incoming planes to the United States from foreign countries. And so there was a huge airport in Gander, Newfoundland. And so everything was diverted on these planes coming in that first 24-hour period after the attack. And this was to a very small town, 7,000 people, but it had this huge ex-base there for airplanes. And so it could take it was 550 planes landed there, which more than doubled the size of this town. And there were all these people that were destined for someplace in the United States. And it shows the goodness. There was such a horrific thing of that attack. And then all these people in Canada rallied round and found places for these people to stay. They fed them, and there are just wonderful little vignettes throughout this. This is all true. Since that time, a stage play was made from this book, and it's called Come From Away. And we were in the Twin Cities going to be able to see that stage play. It had been a hit in New York for 2 years, just a wonderful musical. And it was coming to the Ordway, I believe it was, in January of 2020. And of course, that was canceled. And so it's coming again this January 22. So if you haven't read this book, be sure and do it. It's just such a fine read. And then plan to go see the play. Pamela, what do you call it, Pamela? Did it for me on my iPad, and I got to watch the musical. She had seen it in New York, and she saw that they were doing that, and she arranged for me to be able to see it. And
It's on Hulu.
it's on Hulu, she said. And so if you can watch it, do watch it. It's really wonderful. And if it was that great, just watching it, like zooming it, I can't imagine what it's going to be when the play gets here. Here is Remember. And Remember was written by Lisa Genova, who did Still Alice. And it was the first story written about somebody who had Alzheimer's. Lisa Genova is a neurologist, brain study, has her PhD in that, and does all kinds of brain studies. And that was why she wrote that novel. She personally knew someone at that time that had Alzheimer's, and she thought this was a way of telling the story of what happens in Alzheimer's. Now she's done a nonfiction book on remembering and loss of memory. And it's such an easy read. And it actually, I found it comforting. At 83, it's a part of aging to start forgetting things, that's for sure. But this was so comforting in that she explains to us that it's a part of aging to start losing some memory. The brain does not function and remember all the same things the same way. So sometimes it's something that is traumatic that happens in our life that we'll never forget. It was when we're young, we seem to be able to go back there and remember so much because our brain was developing and we were learning so much. But the day-to-day thing, the short-term memory loss is what older people have the most trouble with, new learning and short-term memory loss. And it gave me comfort to know that it's just a part of aging. Only 1% of people, the elderly, ever end up with Alzheimer's. And the other part is just you're getting older and you're starting to forget some of those things. Also, she gives you all these hints about how you should be eating, what you should be doing, what's good to do to help keep that brain going, and what isn't good to do. And it's so simple. You can take it in and you can remember it. I thought it was a very good book on this subject and such an easy read. Now, here's a favorite book that I discovered when Ann and I still owned the store, and we sold the store in January of 2020. But the Christmas before, people were asking for this book all the time, and we got several in, but pretty soon it was out of stock and couldn't get it in time for Christmas. But I never read it, and it wasn't until this year. It's still on the bestseller list. And it's a book of really philosophy and ethics, simply done with beautiful artwork. And it's been sold as the book for people from 8 to 80 or beyond. And it's teaching everyone that you have to learn to love yourself and accept yourself first. And that is how you learn to love others and accept others. And you can pick it up and read it in a very short time, but I find that I go back to it. It's just such a nice book. I've given 4 of these as graduation gifts. High school graduation, college graduation, and even med school graduation. And it's good for everyone, and you'll love it. I know you will. And it's kind of nice. I thought when I went to St. Catherine University, we had to take a philosophy course every year. And boy, did we complain about that. But thinking back over my lifetime now, those classes I've used more in my life than probably any of the classes I took. Ethics and philosophy, how you look on life. This is really a simple one, but it's great. Ann Patchett has a new book that's coming out the middle of November, and it's called These Precious Days. It's about, I think, 20 to 25 essays that she's written. Some are new essays, but a lot of them are essays that have been in the New Yorker magazine, New York Times, Harper's Bazaar, even 17 magazine for young people. Different. You're getting Ann Patchett's biography by reading these essays, and I guarantee everyone you read, you're going to like and feel good. I loved it. I've decided I like Ann Patchett's nonfiction even better than her novels. The essays can be as short as maybe 6 pages. There's one essay in it that's 60 pages about a friend that was dying of cancer that she admired very, very much. And it's their co-battle with this pancreatic cancer. And it's wonderful. She's got an essay on Snoopy from Charlie Brown, how as a child, she read the Snoopy cartoon every day. And her parents were divorced when she was very young, probably, I think she was like 6 and her sister 8 at the time of the divorce. And it has greatly affected her life. She refers to her father a lot and not so much her mother. However, there's a nice essay about her mother in this, and there's a nice essay about her 3 fathers, her biological father, and then her 2 stepfathers as she was growing up. It's just really a good book. If you like to read essays, be sure and get it. You'll enjoy it greatly. And the last one on the nonfiction list is Fox and I. And this is written by Catherine Raven, who is a naturalist and college professor out in Montana. And she owns, I think it's about 40 acres of land out in Montana that she's let most of it go wild. And she noticed one morning a fox on her property. And that was just in passing, because fox are not animals that like to be around people. You can't tame a fox. But then she started noticing this fox every afternoon about 4 o'clock, 4:15. This fox would be on her property. And she thought, there is no way that I'm going to try and tame this fox. Fox do not want contact with humans, and they're not the type that you would want to tame in any case. So she started leaving her property every afternoon at about 3:45. Excuse me. So she wouldn't be there when the fox came. And then she'd go to town and think, I wonder if the fox came today. She'd get back in her truck and she'd drive back to the country and her property, and there would be the fox sitting, waiting for her to come home. So she finally gave up and decided that she would try and tame this fox. And so she just at first started sitting out in a chair and watching the fox, and the fox watches her. But she is a naturalist, so as you're reading this book, you're getting all kinds of information on climate change and the loss of all the animals and bugs that we're experiencing right now. And it isn't a book that you would want to sit down and read the whole thing all at once. I read it chapter by chapter just when I felt like reading something about climate change and nature. But in time, this fox kept coming closer and closer. And so she started reading poetry to him, and she read The Little Prince to him, and he would sit there and listen. And it turned out she did have, fox do not live too long because of they've got a lot of predators after them too. so she knew this was a foolish thing to do, but she was caught up with it and did it. And they had an over 4-year relationship together. And it's just, you get a lot of information on nature and flora and fauna, and an interesting story about a companionship with a wild animal. But after I finished it, I thought, I've read this story before. When did I read this story? And 10 years ago, I have a picture book collection. I every year buy a couple outstanding picture books. 10 years ago, I bought this book, A Story for Bear, partially because of the beautiful artwork, but it was a story about a library, children's librarian, as I was at one time, and she, for the summer, would come to the woods and live in a wood cabin. And she started noticing as she sat out in her Adirondack chair that this bear was coming to the property. And so she started reading to the bear. And it came every day, and she would read to him for a while. And of course, when fall came, she closed up her cabin, but she left all the books that she had read to Bear that summer for him. And in the end papers and at the end of the book, you see the bear picking up all the books, taking to his cave, and he goes into hibernation surrounded by books. So it was a lovely, lovely little story, and with beautiful artworks. And it was one of the books I chose 10 years ago. And I went, after I had finished Fox and I went through my collection and pulled this out, and I thought, that's why I thought I'd read the parts of this story before that just came out this fall. And it's because of this picture book. And I thought, how interesting that. So if you need a beautiful picture book, I checked, it's still in print, both in hardcover and paper. It's a wonderful story for kindergarten, first and second graders who love animals. And now quickly, the young adult children's one. I picked the two best that I had read this year. In case any of you have grandchildren from the age of 10 to 14, or great grandchildren, great nephews and nieces. The first one is Pony, and this is written by the author of Wonder. And remember when Wonder first came out 4 years ago? Wonder still has never gone in paper. It is still selling so well. It's in 50 different languages now. I think I read that she has sold 30, I'm not she, but her publisher has sold 30 million copies of Wonder, that wonderful, wonderful story. And all that she has written since she came out with Wonder are stories relating to the Wonder character or the friends that were introduced in that book. But this is a complete switch for her too. It's a historical novel for boys about a 12-year-old boy in the 1860s who wakes up one night. It's rural Ohio in 1860 when it takes place. And he wakes up to a fight going on in his father's home, and 3 men have come and gotten his father and taken him and disappeared on horses. And he doesn't know what to do, but they have a ghost that lives in their house. And between the ghost telling him that he should find his father and a mysterious pony that arrives on the property, he decides that he is going to go and find out what happened to his father and why these men took him. And it's a whipping adventure story for boys. They will absolutely love it. And I did too. And then Kate Dicamilo, who has won a prize for every book she's ever written, has a new one that just came out this past month. And this is for girls, definitely, that I would say age 10 to 14. It's part historical novel, it's part fairy tale. And Beatrix is an 8-year-old girl found by some monks at the abbey in their barn with their goat. And she is snuggled up sleeping with this goat. And actually, the monks have not liked this goat and they wish they could butcher it, but they are afraid the ghost will come back and haunt them if they do, because it's such a mean ghost. But here's this little girl snuggled up, holding on to one of its ears, and the goat will not let the monks come near the little girl. And they know from past they've gotten bullied by the goat, kicked by the goat, rammed by the goat, but they finally, the goat realizes that he can't really help this little girl now. And he lets the monks take her out of that. And who is Beatrix? That's all she can give them. She's crying so hard, she can't tell them who she is. She can't remember who she is, but she does know her name, Beatrix. And they realize that she's gone through great trauma, but they feel they must protect her. And for a good reason. We found out that Beatrix is the rightful ruler of the kingdom. But the mean uncle, who is the king, does not want a female taking over the kingdom. And so she has escaped people that were set out to kill her. It's a really great story. Typical. I know she's going to win a big prize for this book. It's like she always does. Wonderful wonder. If you have a 10 to 14-year-old girl, you must get the new Kate Dicamilo for her. And lastly, I wanted to tell you about 2 mystery series. You know how much I loved an elderly lady that is up to no good. Well, the sequel has come out. This little book about Maud, the 88-year-old Scandinavian woman in the first book, is getting ready for Christmas. And in those couple months that led up to Christmas, she kills several people. She is a serial killer, but she only kills people who are very bad. And you know how much I love that book and encourage people to just have a fun read. And it was at Christmas time. Well, now the sequel is just a few months after the Christmas season. And there's 2 women detectives who were suspicious, if you remember, in the last interconnecting short story, that's how the books are arranged, of Maud's adventures, were kind of suspicious that this little old lady wasn't as daffy as she would appear to be. And they're zeroing in on her. So Maud thinks she's got to get out of town. And she leaves Scandinavia and goes on a South African safari to get away from. And of course, Maud meets some bad people that she thinks don't deserve to be alive in South Africa too. But it has such a satisfying ending to this story. This will be the end of Maud's adventures, I think. One doesn't know for sure, but it's as much fun to read as its prequel. So I encourage you, if you love the little old lady, see what she's up to these days. And last is 2 books by Richard Osmond, who is an English writer. And this was the first one that he wrote. And it takes place in a retirement village. And there are all kinds of classes offered all the time for people to take. But there are 4 people in the village who aren't interested in these classes. So they started meeting on Thursday nights, 2 women, 2 men, and they solved back cases that were never solved for the police. They take these cases and study them. And because they're all from such diverse backgrounds, they all offer something to figure out. And in this first book, a resident right there at the retirement home is killed, and they figure out who it is. now the sequel is out, and it's The Man Who Died Twice. So if you've read that first one, I know you're going to like this one too. The four are at work again and figure out who the murderer is in this book. It's a #1 bestseller in England right now, and it just has come to the US. So check this out too. I hope that I've given you some really good reads to read this next winter. I enjoyed them all, or I wouldn't have talked about them. They're fun, they're interesting, and they're knowledgeable. And I'll hope you will have as much fun with them as I've had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. We really appreciate your programs.
And the list will be coming for all of you too. So if there was something special that you liked, you'll find it on the list. Next year in person.
Yes.
Yay. Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Pamela, for all the help.
Unless you need us on, we will leave and let you have your meeting. And I will edit this down to just Ellie's talk and send it to Patty's email if that's okay.
That'd be perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Happy holidays to all.
Yes, and happy reading.
Thank you.